Is Renogy's Shadow Flux solar panel really worth the price, or is it really just a sales gimmick? Now, this new solar panel comes in at a real popular price for 200-watt solar panels at about $240 to $250. So that leaves a world of options out there. So is this really the best solar panel for your money? Now, solar panels of this size are typically a little bit more expensive because it is a little bit more niche, but they're popular when you're wanting to put them on sheds, or if you want to maybe do a van build, or if you're like me and you like using them on your RV, this becomes very popular because it can sit on both sides of your AC units. So this is really what I'm looking for, is a new replacement panel. So I got this one, and I also bought a whole bunch of other ones to test this against, just to see, am I really going to use this solar panel, or am I really going to look into another direction? So I bought a whole bunch of different solar panels to compare this one to. That way I know I'm going to make the right choice. So we're going to introduce you to the few that we're going to test this against. Now, Renogy's new solar panel is going to be using half-cut cells. Each one of these cells is going to have 16 bus bars in them, and they are using the latest technology with 25% efficiency and using new N-type cells. This solar panel is going to have an open circuit voltage of 36.5 volts. We're also going to use this BougeRV 200-watt panel. This one is also using new N-type cells and is using 16 bus bars across each cell, just like the Renogy, but they're using quarter-cut cells. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 for every large section of this cell. As you can see here, there's a little circle, and then as you go around, you get basically 4 cuts, versus the Renogy is using the half-cut cells. So you get one cell here, one cell there, basically. So this is going to allow for a lot of efficiency between these two. But this solar panel here is also bifacial, so it will give it a slight advantage, even though most of the testing I'm going to be doing is going to be on the ground, but I will add some reflecting material to it in one of the tests. Now, one small thing that I did find that I kind of didn't like is that nowhere on this solar panel does it actually give you any specifications whatsoever. You have to look in the manual or look online, so if you tend to forget which model this is, you may not know. But they at least send you a manual so you can see bifacial TopCon N-type 200-watt solar panel. And then if we look at our open circuit voltage, we're going to be pretty much the same as what the Renogy is at 36.4 versus 0.5. We're also going to be testing it against this 250-watt bifacial solar panel from Renogy as well. This is in the same price range depending on the time of sales. So this makes it another option because, again, depending on what you're building, sometimes you want to get the most amount of power you can for the dollar that you spend. Now, both this Renogy and also the BougeRV solar panel is using just an EVA film on the back, so it is see-through. You can see all the way through it, and they are also using 16 bus bars and half-cut cells. But now, as we also take a look at our specs up here, our open circuit voltage for this one is actually a little bit lower, so depending on what you're plugging this into, that might be something that you want to look into, because a lot of power stations now are going to be 60 volts. So this might be something to consider depending on what you might be working on. Now, we also have this older BougeRV solar panel. This is also 200 watts, but it is using an older cell. So you have the single type monocrystalline, not an N type, and they're only using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And this was their 9BB model that they came out with a while ago. And honestly, this has not held up well and has already diminished some, so the output is actually pretty poor on this particular panel. And as you can already see here, hopefully you can see this, but there's already some spidering that's going on inside of this cell right here. It's pretty hard to see just with the glare, but it still works, just the output has gone down. And this solar panel is actually pretty cheap though if you were to buy it new. And the last solar panel we're going to include is this EcoFlow 100 watt, but because of the price, you get 2 of these versus just 1 of those over there. So this is why when it comes to that price range of $250 roughly, it gives you a whole bunch of options on different solar panels that you can buy or choose from. And these are all the name brand panels, but now this one here is also using the half-cut cells, but they're using 10 bus bars. And for a 100-watt solar panel, this one does perform really well. But again, this is not going to have N-type cells that are TopCon. This is just going to have the older monocrystalline cells, but it still is a good performing panel. And as we look at our open circuit voltage, this one is running right at 20.3 volts. Now these 3 panels are the ones that I really have my eye on, is the Renogy Shadow Flux, the BougeRV bifacial, and also the newer style Renogy bifacial 250. This one here may not work for my application just due to I already have everything built around this size for what I'm doing. Hence that 250, if it's something you could use, it might be a good option depending on what you find out after this video. Now when it does come to these 2 solar panels, being that they are bifacial, but notice the design, this metal bar in the middle is a big long bus bar. So this is like one solar panel, this is like another solar panel. So they are actually 2 solar panels basically connected together. So this is also going to affect when you shade these how they perform, which you'll see here shortly. Okay, so we're going to be plugging both of these into a couple of Renogy batteries along with a couple of Victron solar charge controllers. All of my wiring is the same, my extensions are the same, and that way we can get kind of the most accurate data. And the first test we're going to do is a combined test of how many watt hours we can get within about a 4 to 5 hour period, and also a shade test using the Renogy Shadow Flux along with the BougeRV bifacial solar panel. Now, over the 2 days of testing, the temperatures are going to be extremely hot, around 104 and 106 degrees, so we are only going to see about 70 to 80% of rated output for all of these solar panels. Now, I did set up a synthetic shade test for both of these solar panels, which we are going to keep track of through about a 5-hour period. The Renogy will consistently be on Victron number 1 for the Shadow Flux, while the BougeRV will be on Victron 2, and we'll keep track of how many watt hours and also just the power that we see throughout this test. Now, both of these batteries are going to start under 7%, and we will see what the total is after the test. Now, I did set up a synthetic shade test, which this lasted for just about 2 hours on the Renogy Shadow Flux, so I ended up timing it to make sure that the shadows lasted about 2 hours on the BougeRV bifacial. Now, as we take a look at this graph of the BougeRV solar panel, this started around 9:15 where I plugged it in the morning, and as you can see, the wattage goes up as the sun gets higher in the sky. Then it starts to drop off as the shade hits the solar panel, with it dropping as low as 60 watts. Then it quickly went back up, and as heat soak started to set in, we saw a max of about 144 until the sun started to drop lower in the sky and our watts dropped off. And now as we take a look at the Renogy Shadow Flux, we saw a low of about 79 watts during the shade test, and then it consistently went up as the shade moved off the solar panel to where it ended up seeing a high of about 156 to 160 watts until it started to become heat soaked. And then you can see the MPPT solar charge controller continuing trying to get the most amount of power about every 15 to 20 minutes. As we look at the data here, the Renogy Shadow Flux easily beat out the BougeRV bifacial as it pulled in more watt hours and a higher wattage overall. And as we look at the battery state of charge, obviously this was much higher at 51% versus the 43%. Now, I still wanted to do a shade test between both of these solar panels, and again, the Victron number 1 is the Renogy, which we are shading now. Now, only doing a 25% test, this gets very sensitive if I touch the second row at all, which you will see different results later. Now, as we go over to the BougeRV solar panel, this definitely drops down a lot, and again, because it's like 2 solar panels in one, it ends up dropping the wattage way down, which you will see different results here in just a minute. As we go and do a 50% test, this is where the BougeRV solar panel consistently drops under 10 watts. As we move over to the Renogy Shadow Flux, you'll actually see slightly higher output at the 50% test, which this is actually pretty interesting because even though the BougeRV is bifacial, it's definitely not helping it in any sort of way. As we move over to a 3/4 test, it's putting out about 8 to 9, maybe 10 watts. As I go back to the BougeRV solar panel, it is still going to be under 10 watts and now only producing about 5 watts. As we go to 100% test, we find that the max output is now going to be about 5 watts. As we move over to the Renogy Shadow Flux, I was surprised to see a higher output considering, again, the BougeRV is bifacial, but you can see we're consistently getting around 7 to 8, maybe even 9 watts depending on how long I stand here. So pretty impressive so far with all the shade testing that I've done. Now, it wouldn't be a complete shade test if I didn't do the other direction, so I'm just going to cover up one set of cells on the bottom of the Renogy Shadow Flux, and you can see our output is actually really high at 126 watts. As we go over to the BougeRV solar panel, it drops all the way to 72, But again, remember, this is like 2 solar panels, so basically that solar panel on the bottom is not really producing anything, and the top half is really doing all the work. As we continue to shade the ShadowFlex solar panel, the output is still very impressive at 95 watts. And then as we look at the wattage on the Victron number 2 for the BougeRV, it consistently stays around 71 watts. So again, the bottom half is not really doing anything. And as we continue to add more shade to the Renogy ShadowFlux, this ends up being to where we see a bigger drop off of about 25 watts, and then the 50% mark is where we see the biggest drop off, where it looks like it will stay under 10 watts. Now when we go back to the BougeRV and start hitting into that second solar panel, that's where again we are going to see this drop off to around 5 to 6 watts, and where it pretty much doesn't change after that. And then of course the Renogy ShadowFlux will continue to put out its 8 watts after about the 50% coverage. Now I did want to give the bifacial a fighting chance by adding at least some kind of reflective material under it, because again, bifacial panels, to get the most amount out of them, you're supposed to mount them about 3 feet or a meter high, which again, because I'm looking for a replacement for my RV, these aren't really going to be more than a couple inches off of the roof. But now as we take a look at the input, you can see 136 watts is what we're getting, but after adding the reflective material, it bumped it up to 149 watts. Even though it was a gain, it's still not enough to take over from the Renogy ShadowFlux solar panel. So I now decided to remove the BougeRV solar panel, as it did lose this competition, at least to the ShadowFlux, and I ended up throwing the BougeRV 200 watt solar panel just to take a look. Now as we look at the data here, this quickly went up to about 146 watts, but after letting the heat sink in, this ended up losing a lot of ground, and I pretty much just discontinued the test because there was no way this was going to be able to compete whatsoever. I then removed this BougeRV solar panel and then decided to put both of the EcoFlow solar panels on the ground and adjusted these accordingly so they would be at approximately the same angle. I plugged both of these into series and then took a look at the data. Now typically 2 solar panels do have an advantage because you can operate them independently by putting them in parallel. It all depends on your setup, but you can see after the heat starts to sit in, the actual wattage started to drop to about 153 at one point, which really didn't provide any advantage over the Renogy ShadowFlux. So I decided to move on from this test and maybe test 2 against 1 in a later video, which you'll have to let me know if that's something you would like to see. But now I brought up the Renogy bifacial 250 watt solar panel because again, you can pick this up for the same price or sometimes less. After I plugged this in, it quickly shot up to around 200 watts, and I let it sit out there for about 20 minutes so it could get heat soaked, and then it ended up leveling off to around 194 watts, which obviously being 250 watts will provide overall more power output as far as our amps and also our watts. Now, it wouldn't be a complete test if I didn't do a shade test for both of these, but this time look at the difference in the output as I stay away from that second row of cells on the ShadowFlux. Notice 103, which last time this same test showed 25 if I slightly encroached on that second row of cells. Now when it came to this part of the test, I quickly realized, well, my shadow is not actually going to be big enough to project all the way onto this solar panel. But again, since it is 2 solar panels in one, it is pretty much diminishing the output way down, which this is where this may become an advantage for the ShadowFlux. If you were to place those bifacials next to each one of the RV ACs, this is where the output would be consistently less than if you had the Renogy ShadowFlux, so therein lies where I am thinking. So again, as we move to the 50% shade test, and both of these are going to suffer greatly, I then decided to move on to another shade test where I would put both of these lengthwise just so you could see the difference in output. Now I decided for this test, I'm going to shade the middle of both of the solar panels and try to leave one cell exposed just to see if there's any difference. Now the Renogy ShadowFlux does a great job, obviously, as you can see, still holding over 100 watts until I get about a third of it shaded. Now again, with the bifacial 250 on the right side, again it's acting as 2 solar panels, so the lower half really isn't putting out any wattage versus the top half is giving us all the power, and these are basically like 125 watt panels stuck together. And as I continue to move up, as soon as I pass the 50% line on the right side panel, that's where you will see the major drop off, and then of course then it goes down to around 10 or so watts. Now again, with this solar panel being bifacial, we'll add this piece of reflective material to see if we can get any gain gains. Now again, bifacial solar panels should be mounted at least 1 meter. That is the minimum if you want to take full advantage. But if you notice, we did gain a couple watts from about 192 to 195 watts. Now as we flip this around, I'm going to move it to where this white side is actually reflecting against the panel to see if there's any gain. And as we take a look, it looks like a consistent 1 extra watt. So if this was on an RV, it's possible it could provide a little bit more power just from most RVs having a white roof. Now, I don't know about you guys, but after buying all these solar panels, I really had my money pegged on actually the BougeRV bifacial, but the Renogy Shadow Flux really did so well. So if you're interested in the Renogy Shadow Flux, you can check that down below, or one of the other solar panels as well. I hope this video helped you out, and I hope to see you in another one.